Great. So thank you, everyone. Really, in terms of time, we're in sort of a happy, we had a happy accident here because without knowing, Dr. Tan has actually shared my conclusions with you already. Um, the message here is that Indian American Christians sing Hillsong songs in worship. The end. Thank you. But my interest, I have to confess here, a little bit of interest in Lex Orandi, which my talk is on today. I have this real interest in this because I realize that we can be praying the same words and not necessarily always meaning the same thing. I have a very good friend and colleague who's a Latin Rite Catholic, and she has recently discovered the riches of the Anglican patrimony in one of the ordinariate parishes in Baltimore. There are 4 ordinariate parishes there in the Baltimore region. And she's found probably the most traditional of all of them. And she said, Scott, I know you're an Episcopalian. Please come to Mass with me sometime at the ordinariate parish. And I said, sure, I'd love to. And I went to Mass with her, and I was just transfixed. It was almost word for word the exact same between the Book of Divine Worship, the Book of Common Prayer, the ceremonial, everything was almost identical. But I thought, in terms of our lex credendi, we believe in slightly different things. And knowing this friend, politically, we believe in sort of diametrically opposed things, but we're still very good friends. So I'll get started here to talk about Indian American Christians love Hillsong. So that's sort of the thesis of my presentation today. So in his study of the historical roots of the adage Lex Orandi, Lex Credendi, in 5th century anti-Pelagian theologian Prosper of Aquitaine's writings on Augustine, Lutheran scholar Maxwell Johnson provides a necessary word of caution to those who support or oppose the evolution of worship styles based on their perceived effect on the historically received deposit of faith. While Johnson clearly states that he believes that prayer shapes belief, he reminds his readers that the Lex Orandi is not the only, it's only a single source of authority and cannot act independently of Scripture and tradition. It does not enjoy a privileged or unique place of power to form the entire content of the worshiping community's beliefs. The historical consensus that liturgical texts in themselves cannot be said to establish doctrinal norms underscores the reality that certain liturgical rites are shared by churches with quite different doctrinal norms and sources of authority due to geopolitical and theological realignments. To state a well-known example, liturgies according to the Byzantine Rite of St. John Chrysostom are celebrated in Eastern Orthodox, Eastern Catholic, and Lutheran churches, some of which are located within the same cities of post-Soviet Ukraine. If you want to think about the North American context, those of you, Patrick Russell, who are familiar with Johnstown, Pennsylvania, this is a situation in which all the push and pull between the Catholic and the Orthodox world that occurred along the borderlands of empires transferred themselves to the coal fields of central Pennsylvania and continued to develop and evolve. So these things happen along borderlines of empire. They happen when there is emigration. So in effect, the common sources of these rites are complicated, or if you want to take a more positive tone, say enriched. They could be enriched by the ongoing influences of colonialism, independent movements in and emigration from Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and the global South. The Thoma Church, based in the Indian state of Kerala, is an Eastern Rite church with Protestant influenced theology resulting from the effects of British colonialism. The democratically sourced musical elements of its Lex Orandi reflect these 2 streams of ecclesiastical tradition, combining Eastern and Western streams to express its commitment to an ecumenically oriented, mission-minded Eucharistic theology. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip almost all of the historical content of my presentation because you can Google this church. You can read all about it. It's really fascinating. But just to point out some interesting things about it, specifically from the Western influences. that it received. So the Thoma Church, which is based in that southwestern state of India, Kerala, reformed its theology and liturgy under the influence of Evangelical Church of England. You know, Church of England has the sort of high church Catholic wing and the low church evangelical wing. So they were influenced by the low church evangelical wing of the Church of England missionaries. And this caused them to separate from the Orthodox Church in the late 19th century. But it sought to maintain its independence from the Anglicans. They decided not to join up with the Anglicans, but maintain their Eastern Rite theology and liturgy. So it holds to a democratically elected episcopal polity, claims apostolic succession, recognizes 7 sacraments, and uses the Eastern canon of Scripture. And because of these things, it is classified among the Oriental or Eastern Protestant churches. And as you can imagine, that group is very tiny. There are only a few Oriental Protestant churches. But in its public relation documents, it describes itself more fully as, quote, apostolic in origin, universal in nature, biblical in faith, evangelical in principle, ecumenical in outlook, Oriental in worship. And this is the important part for my paper. The important part for my paper is it's democratic in function. This is a democratic sort of Eastern Protestant church and Episcopal in character, end quote. In keeping with the interfaith traditions of its ancestors, the Thoma Church continues ecumenical dialogue with all the other churches in India and abroad. So here's the beginning of my case study. I was interested in specifically in the Thoma community in Baltimore, Maryland. And so the Thoma Church of Baltimore is located in Pikesville, Maryland, which is a Baltimore County community just outside the northwestern Baltimore city limits. And this suburb is also home to the state's largest Ukrainian American community, and there are large populations of Eastern European and Jewish Americans, most of whom are descendants of Ashkenazi Jews who emigrated from the Russian Empire around the turn of the 20th century. And due to its proximity to Washington, D.C., Central Maryland, as you may be aware, is noted for its ethnic, linguistic, and religious diversity. And Christians from all over South Asia are well represented in the area. In addition to the Thoma Church, the Baltimore and D.C. suburbs include Orthodox churches, Syro-Malabar Catholic churches, Syro-Malankara Catholic Church, Syro-Malabite Mission, Syrian Orthodox Church of the Malankara Archdiocese, 2 Indian Orthodox churches. So if you are from the state of Kerala and you want to find somewhere to worship in Central Maryland, you are well cared for in that sense. So Baltimore's Thoma congregation was founded in 1981, worshipped in the chapel of a Methodist church in the city and in its members' homes before purchasing a former Methodist church in Pikesville in 1995. And if you go to this church and you don't know what's about to unfold because the curtain hasn't opened yet, you'll think, oh yeah, I'm sort of in a Methodist church from the mid-19th or the mid-20th century. This looks very familiar. You look at these pews. There's an altar rail with padded kneelers. There's a wooden carved reredos and communion table on the back wall. Looks very Methodist until the priest comes out in silver cloth and all of the sorts of West Syriac Rite things start to unfold. So the choir is front and center. The choir is lined up in 2 rows facing left in the front of the nave. And the choir area features both a traditional electric organ and a synthesizer. And then there's also a drum set there underneath the left-hand side pulpit. So each place in the choir was equipped with a stand microphone. This appears to be something typical of Indian and Indian American worship, that everyone gets their own microphone so that if we're recording for YouTube or we want to make sure that the PA system is working, everyone's equipped with a microphone. So in addition to using Malayalam or English language liturgy books, parishioners could follow the text of the service on a computer screen mounted above the left-hand side pulpit. And at the Malayalam language Kurbana, which is the Holy Eucharist, the Malayalam text also appeared in a Latin alphabet transliteration because not all of the English dominant congregants would be able to read in Malayalam script. So they sort of understand the language, but they need the Latin alphabet transliteration. So during choir practice, which I was present for, and the post-liturgy fellowship luncheon, Conversations revealed that most adult members of this congregation are fully bilingual and speakers sort of code switched with ease. Although in India, the liturgy is in the vernacular rather than the original Syriac, in the United States, Malayalam may be in the process of becoming a liturgical language for those young people, these young people who may use it much less frequently in the decades to come. So except for the 2 scripture readings, the sermon, some announcements, the entire liturgy, it's like a 2-hour-long liturgy, sung in Syriac chant, hymns set to both Indian and English unison melodies. The priest was assisted by 2 cantors, one who also served as thurifer, and the other as the choir director, and the latter chanted the epistle. Both the chant and hymn melodies were accompanied by organ or keyboard, and the congregation clearly had this all memorized. They know all of the chants because there was a little bit of an electrical situation with the keyboard, and the keyboard sort of dropped out. Everybody just kept singing like nothing had happened. And so just really full-voiced, confident singing. Everyone was participating. But something that was notable, and it's sort of a minor tone chant. It was really high. The pitch is quite high, and I wondered if it was because the priest has sort of a countertenor tone. And so I thought that, okay, everyone's trying to match him. And so the sopranos and the children are matching, the octave, and then some of the altos and the men are in the middle, and the bass. The men are singing the bass, and so you've got 3 octaves of Syriac chant going on all at once between the congregants, the choir, the two deacons, and the priest. So the denomination's Protestant Anglican influence theology is clearly reflected in this congregation's musical life. Before the start of services, English language praise music played softly in the background on the streaming service. The Malayalam language service started with the English language hymn, the church's one foundation, the one you all know, the traditional tune, Aurelia. And the 2 Malayalam language communion hymns were translations of texts by the English hymnodists Francis Havergal and Charles Wesley. So definitely church mission society, evangelical Anglican influence on their hymnody. So these were sung to Indian-style tunes accompanied by block chords on the organ instead of a Western-style choral harmonization. And the closing hymn was really interesting. It was a Malayalam language translation of Nearer My God to Thee, but sung to its traditional tune of Bethany. So you're thinking like, oh, there's that sad song that they sing in Titanic, but it's in Malayalam. So that was a moment, it took me back there during the liturgy. So hymns sung at the English language service on the second Sunday of the month included a selection of 18th and 19th century British hymns. So no surprise there. They would have been completely indistinguishable from the repertoire of a traditional worship service of an Anglo-American mainline Protestant congregation. We know, we love our 18th and 19th century hymns, World Without End. We will sing them until we die. And this congregation clearly loves them as well. The fourth Sunday of each month is reserved for the children and youth of the choir to choose and lead the hymns. And these were selected from favorites from YouTube, Dr. Tan, and Christian music streaming services. We knew where all these came from. And so the words were posted on the computer screen for the adults to join in with the kids, but they did not. They did not know the music. The songs seemed to be sort of received as an offering by the youth rather than a time of congregational song. So I watched them on the fourth Sunday of March in 2024. So the Young People's Choir opened with Hillsong Hosanna. At the offertory communion, they sang a selection of songs from Hillsong, David Crowder Band, unidentified song in Malayalam, and they also fit in probably to please their parents and grandparents. They filled in the African American spiritual, let us break bread together on our knees. So very impressive repertoire of songs. I mean, the kids sang like 7 songs in a row for the offertory and communion. And so it was sung either unison, 2-part harmony in thirds, a cappella, except for some drumming. There was a young woman drummer seated inside her plexiglass cubicle. Praise bands like to, encase their drummer so it doesn't completely dominate worship. And that's what was happening here. But the singers had very interesting posture. They were standing very erect, motionless, sort of leaning very slightly towards their microphones. And I thought that, they probably, their Christian friends, their Christian peers at school, and the online, online media that they're consuming, they're probably, used to a very, expressive physical style, but in church, no. And I didn't really inquire into that, but I was wondering if because there's very close proximity between boys, girls, men, and women in this choir, I thought that probably had something to do with the mixed gender way that these people were standing. They probably tell the children, no, you will not move standing next to a boy or a girl like that. But it's also possible that this type of physical response to music is considered to be sort of incompatible with Indian American notions of public piety. In public, we are dignified. So conversations with the priest and choir director revealed the sources of musical authority in congregational worship. It's democratic. I spoke with the priest and the choir director before, and they both emphasized democracy. The priest talks to the choir director talks to each member of the choir to find out what are the favorites, what does the congregation want to hear. We're going to look at the lectionary and make sure that they make sense, but they constantly poll to find out what are we singing this Sunday, what does everyone want to sing. So there's a single Sunday morning liturgy, just the one, because it takes 2 hours to get through the whole thing. And so there's really no division like you might find in some Protestant congregations where there's a contemporary service and a traditional service. There's none of that. It's the single Syriac Rite liturgy of St. James that serves as this point of unity it's a point of unity and doctrinal stability, but it also allows for a variety of musical traditions, and you could see what I was talking about, all the various centuries of music that this congregation enjoys. So it meets all of its congregants' needs in its incorporation of metrical hymnody. So about how much time do I have left? About 10 minutes? Okay. I will read quickly. Okay. Yeah. Including questions. So I've got about 5 minutes. Yeah. So I'm gonna skip ahead here. Let's see. So I think the linguistic and cultural assimilation are big questions, I think, for my talk, Colleen's talk, Sister Kay's talk. And so notions of cultural assimilation, but also the sad realities of racism in American culture are determining what is the community going to look like? What is the worship going to look like? And so there is sort of has been an exodus of second generation Asian Americans out of the church because the church just does not reflect their realities, but they try to turn to more white identified church, and that doesn't fit. And so you have the dual phenomenon of Asian Americans leaving the church and others forming their own churches to have a more authentic sort of second and third generation experience. So lots of really cool stuff to share with you, but I'm going to skip ahead. The one thing I wanted to say is that you can really get this wrong. In the interest of being very inclusive and having intersectional liturgies, you can get it wrong. My own Episcopal church tried to put together a quote-unquote Asian hymnal, not realizing that there are so many languages, so many traditions, and to put together one single hymnal was really sort of a crazy idea. And unfortunately, some genius decided that it should be called, and I quote, Rice and Sing. And you can imagine the tremendous blowback from the various constituencies that said, we will not be calling our hymnal that. But so the question for our Mar Thoma Christians there in the Washington, D.C., Baltimore Baltimore metro area, is if Syriac rite worship is a distinctive enough tradition within Christianity that the youngest generation who are singing Hillsong and David Crowder, if it's distinctive enough that the youngest generation will choose to preserve it. So at present, the Baltimore area parish offers English worship twice a month, but on the Malayalam language Sundays, everyone shows up anyway because they have this amazing, delicious buffet lunch afterwards. And people who don't speak a word of Malayalam come to liturgy anyway because they know they will see all their friends there. The food is amazing, and food, as well as music, has helped to build community here. So last page. So it's perhaps an Orientalist fantasy on my part, an Anglo-American Episcopalian, to imagine cross-pollination of musical styles between the Thoma Christians in India and the United States. The internet and the frequent travel between the two nations have strengthened ties among the diaspora, but will that result in new hymnody? The relatively small size of this church, just over 1 million members worldwide, the language barrier may prevent young musicians in the United States from staying current with contemporary worship music in Kerala and producing a new genre of authentically Indian American hymnody. But there is a small bright spot in all of this. One notable exception to someone who's like taking Indian genres of music is recent emergence of Daniel Chakramakil, who is a Syro-Malabar Catholic from Houston who uses the medium of hip-hop to evangelize young Indian American Catholics from this Indian American Catholic perspective. So an ongoing conversation on religious and racial identity continues among Asian American Christians about how to decenter the white hegemony of evangelical Protestant musical and preaching styles, and how to engage in the organic development of an authentic new song. Here we go. An ongoing, authentic new song. Chinese American hymnodist Gloria Fanchang has observed 4 tendencies in the small but growing development of Asian American liturgical music, drawing from cultural themes like reverence and the fear of God, addressing the lived experience of Asian Americans, telling the stories of Asian American history, and incorporating Asian musical themes and hymnody. These trends may mark the path forward for the future development of independent and genuinely Asian American musical traditions within the church. As the current generation of young musicians in their 20s and 30s grows more confident in expressing their faith in genres and styles that speak to their unique bi- and multicultural experiences, new opportunities for outreach to the unchurched and those who left their parents' churches will take shape. The lex credendi of the Thoma Christians of Baltimore is clearly oriented toward an evangelical, mission-minded Protestantism, and the democratic traditions of its denominational polity allow for a more expansive Lex Orandi, folding the voices of its younger members into a multi-generational chorus of praise. The future will determine how these young Indian American Christians will take advantage of their church's democratic traditions and ecumenical orientation to ensure that their worship music remains a living tradition. Thank you. All right. And we've got perfect timing. Time for questions. Indian American Christians love Hillsong. Thank you. Great. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Wow. Okay, we've made it. Yes, let's give the floor to Dr. Tan just for a couple minutes, just so he can wrap things up, just a few words. And then, yeah, please.
I'll keep my final response as short as possible. I think there are 3 points I would like to make. I'll combine both presentations together, and they tie very much to, I think, the topic of my paper, which I was thinking mostly of the afternoon sessions. The first point I want to make is the dominance of English colonialism. the idea of receiving, when I hear sister's presentation, Mother's Union, that is so Anglican, Church of England, and it has seeped through the Catholic world that was part of the dominance of the British Empire, so that, Mother's Union is only something that is uniquely Anglican, but yet you see Catholic communities doing the very Anglican thing. Communion this way, that's very Anglican. Throughout the Anglican communion, this is how you receive communion, and Catholics do that. So just 2 points to note: the dominance of the British Empire, which also ties to the fact the church mission societies impact, because the St. Thomas Christians was splintered apart by both the Portuguese Padroado Jesuits as well as the CMS missionaries. Abraham Maupan is oriental in liturgy but reformed in theology, and that it follows the CMS Low Church Evangelical Reform viewpoint. Now, this leads to a very interesting question, because one of the things we note is in India, the Thoma Church is still very patriarchal and hierarchical. Thoma communities in the US, if you don't subscribe to that, you switch to the Episcopal Church. My parish priest is invited. Yes, my good friend Winnie Varghese comes from a very devout Thoma family. She's rector of St. Luke's in Atlanta. My priest's cousin. Yes. Winnie Varghese is a good friend of mine. John Tatamaniu. There's so many Thoma theologians who have crossed the proverbial Thames or whatever to become Episcopalian, because the Thoma Church is still, like many Oriental Orthodox, still stuck. So that's first point. Now, the second point, I think, specifically to respond to sister's point, because canon law, the Code of Canon Law, the Catholic Church allows for personal parishes. Many of these, like the Ghanaian community and others, are under provisional canon law. They take advantage of the personal parish. Now, this is the problem with the way I see it. This is only a subsidy for the old national churches of pre-Vatican II, where within the 1 square mile you have this Lithuanian, you have the Irish here, you have the Italians there. They all are apart, and they don't talk to one another. And we know that the big fights between the German and Irish Catholics in 19th century US Catholicism, the Abilene Memorial, where the German Catholic immigrants petitioned to Propaganda Fide to allow the German bishops to send German priests, because they do not want to go to church under the Irish priests. The fight. Now, personal parishes in Cincinnati, there's also the Ghanaian bishops have sent a vicar to look after the Ghanaian Catholics in Cincinnati. In Cincinnati, there is a personal parish that's Korean. The Archdiocese of Seoul sends out Catholic priests, which reports to the Archbishop of Seoul, that looks after Korean Catholics all throughout the U.S. They are not integrated within the U.S. Catholic Church. So we have all these talks. So one of the things I talk about intersectionality, you have one example here, then the other example of St. Camillus, which shows the other possibility, where you have Bengali, you have Caribbean, you have Haitian Catholics, all Creole, French, Bengali, English, Spanish coming together to form parish. So that's one model of intersectionality. Within the Episcopal conversation, I can think of is St. Patrick's in Falls Church, Virginia, which basically has it's an Episcopal parish with 3 groups: the Koreans, the Vietnamese, and the Anglos, founded by Vietnamese. So in the liturgy, like in the prayers of the people, in Episcopal tradition, the prayers of the people are offered in 3 languages. You have in the principal Eucharist, there is alternate between English, Vietnamese, and Korean. If you go to the parish website, there's English and Vietnamese. Even though the first rector was Vietnamese, the founding rector, but now the new rector is a white woman, but they still maintain that. So there's another example as an attempt at intersectionality. So I'm not so on the idea of personal parishes because it creates all this silo. You're in this little group. What is the body of Christ that is splintered? What does that tell the world where we cannot break bread together? We are all in our little communities. The Koreans are here, the Ghanaians are there, so on and so forth. Now, this leads me to my final point on, when we look at music. So this is to your point. Music is pretty interesting because for too long, when we talk about music, and this is my critique of music in the Episcopal Church too, because even though I'm Catholic, I work for them, so I have every right to critique. It's, again, very artificial, top-down, very elite. Does that music represent? I think the point we raised about Hillsong and others, even though we may joke and tease about it, when we look at the Kanaya Catholic, Syro-Malabar Catholic, Thoma Church, the main liturgies, the divine liturgies, the Kubanas are, of course, Malayalam or English, but when we look at the youth group, they all sing things like Hillsong. I asked my student, do you sing In Christ Alone? Yes. Do you sing Worthy is the Lamb? Yes. Do you sing 10,000 Reasons? Yes. Even though they are Kanaya Catholic. Kanaya is one of the groups like with the Thoma Church on the other end. So where music makes sense, at least for Asian Americans, is I only seen it, in places for Filipino Catholics, for Vietnamese Catholics, for Indian Catholics. The development of a vernacular music that really, to echo Father John's point, that flows out of the community. You go into any Vietnamese Catholic, or even go to St. Patrick's Vietnamese Episcopalian, or you go to the Hmong Church down in Minnesota, Holy Apostles. You have a Hmong congregation that is formed primarily from Hmong Catholics, I think. Because it was a Catholic seminarian who became an Episcopal priest. But again, what you find in that is, rather than a bunch of experts trying to invent music, it is the community's music that is adopted. I wouldn't use the word democratically, I prefer the word like consensus. This is our music, we like it, right? The democracy is a Western concept because we are so used to, we choose. But sometimes, there are certain music or certain genres that unites, whether you're young or old, even if you're English speaking, you know something about it. So you walk into any Vietnamese parish, any Filipino parish, they can sing that even in the US. And some of the ironies is that songs that are written by Filipino American, like Ricky Manalo, is now sung in the Philippines and Asia because it's brought back. Everybody love it. It's bilingual. Like Ang Katawan communion hymn, there is English verses, Tagalog chorus. It was written specifically for here, but you hear it sung now in the Philippines, all across the Filipino diaspora in the Philippines, Hong Kong, because it resonates with that. So I think the way forward is not to craft. I think as you are right, there's a big critique, the fight to replace the 1982 hymnal at the General Convention would die because it's basically a bunch of experts like David Hurd and others, elite writing elite music, which does not make sense for the people. Ultimately, I think Father John's point, music has to come from the community. It's the community's music. They like it, they sing it. Even if to the experts this sounds like, it's not high class, it's not elite or whatever, but it is their music. And until that point comes, perhaps, Worthy is the Lamb or 10,000 Reasons, maybe the things they sing. Thank you.
All right. thank you for staying until the end. Dr. Tan, I have a little gift for you. Just as a thank you to a very long day of listening to presentations and engaging with our students. So thank you so much. Should we take a picture with Colleen and Sister Kay? And I think we can stop recording too. Thank you.